we're going to do today is going to go through some measurement. There's actually a homework assignment. I don't think I posted it on there yet. We're going to talk about measurement and measurement tools. Because if you can't measure, then you're in the wrong profession. Okay? So, a lot of you probably have used some of the tools that we're going to talk about today and never really thought about why you would use one tool over another. And so that's really what we're going to do today, is talk about all the different options that we have, why I might use one thing over another, and so forth and so on. And that's when we get to that. So we'll start off with the scale, all right? Otherwise known as a ruler. How many people have used a ruler before? Everybody. Because we don't get to college without having used a ruler, right? I hate it when people put them back. They're dead. So how accurate am I with the ruler or the scale? How accurate can I be? What's the usual, what am I typically going to see as far as markings on it? Yeah, so 16ths, 30 seconds, sometimes 64ths, all right, and they are out there in 1/28. Okay, so at best, I can be that accurate, but there's a problem. Right? So when you're looking at this scale, what's the problem? What makes this less accurate?
You can put it on something and it not be perfectly lined up with it.
Right, I have to line up, especially on this one, because if we look at the start of it, it's got extra metal out the side, right? So I can't just nest it up against something. All right. Instead, I have to start my measurement somewhere and I have to end my measurement somewhere. All right. And how accurate is my ability to line those up? All right. Hold on. Let me turn this. That's what I don't like about meeting down here. Oh, that's so much better. Okay, now say that again.
I'm just saying you probably definitely can't line it up within 128 accuracy, so even if the ruler's that accurate.
Okay. So yeah, it depends. And I'll tell you that old-time craftsmen, turn of the century, that's what they had. All right, and a lot of the tools that we're going to talk about today came from that era, all right? And so I would say that somebody who has spent a lifetime doing exactly that, they can be very accurate, all right, to 128ths, all right? But for the average person, how often do I use a scale? Not very, all right? So accuracy, not so great. So when would I use it? When would I use it?
Sometimes larger projects, like if you're doing say you're building a wooden desk.
Okay.
The accuracy isn't really dependent. It's not like you don't get to really accurate. You just have to get
Right.
angles.
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm doing carpentry, which I've been known to do, the level of accuracy for carpentry is, if you're under a half an inch, you're probably good. unless you're doing finished carpentry. All right, because you can fudge it. All right, you can move stuff over, nails will bridge a gap. All right, you can do a lot of creative things to make that up. Well, as engineers, we're not probably going to be working on carpentry other than, you know, maybe their own house or our mom's house or dad's house or whatever. All right, so tape measure. Who's used a tape measure before? All right. How accurate is the tape measure? About the same. Probably a little more accurate. All right. A little known fact about the tape measure, and I forget who it was. Let me see that for a second. So with the tape measure, it's got this little foot on it, right? That I can put on something and I can pull the tape measure out. Right? Everybody knows that. Yes? All right. How many people have noticed that the foot moves? Why does the foot move?
Because when you put it up against something, that it adjusts
Right.
it so that it can be more.
Right. So if I were going to measure up against this and measure out, right, the little foot moves in, and now this is a quasi-accurate reading. Whereas if I were to measure to the outside of that, again, the little foot moves and gives me an accurate. So it moves the width of what the little foot is. Okay? So tape measures, pretty handy. Again, more carpentry related than anything. As somebody who's working on metal and such, when might I use a tape measure? Joaquin, when was you use tape measure? Huh?
I don't know. Maybe something for really long.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so if I've got something that's 36 inches long and my longest precision is 24, guess what? I'm going to be using a tape measure. Right? If I'm cutting off material, I'm getting ready to machine something and I just need, you know, a rough blank that is approximately 10 inches long. Tape measure is great because I can lay it on there, I can clamp it in the saw, cut it off, and we're good. Tape measures. All right. Typically, you're going to see these, and actually you probably won't see that very often. They are out there. One thing to think about with a tape measure, though, is that many, many years ago, I actually worked as a general contractor and was working on a building site. And one of the guys was laying out the location of studs the night before. So he worked over, all right, and then we came in the morning and something wasn't quite right. The location of the studs didn't wind up at the end where it was supposed to be. So we thought, oh, maybe it's a miscalculation. Well, it turns out that he was using an import tape measure. All right, as opposed to a good quality name brand. He was using, you know, a Buffalo, I think is what it was actually at the time, which was a real cheap China import. And so the cumulative error over 20 some odd feet was enough that things didn't line up. And so, you know, think about that when you're doing this. Is this something that I can rely upon to be good? All right, next thing we're going to talk about. What is this? Oh my goodness gracious. Mariah, of all people. Hold on a second.
I mean, I know it's not, but I don't know what else it's
I
called.
wasn't joking.
No, I didn't. I've seen slide.
Slide ruler. You're right, it's a slide ruler.
Oh,
Really? Wait,
but it's not.
right angle? So it's not just a.
Oh, that's it.
They got like this.
Is this square? Oh, it's just a square.
Yeah, let's say, I thought it was teaching the person.
The slides? Is it just a square?
It is a square. It's a special type of square. All right. This is what's called a combination square, right? All right. And so we use these quite a bit for laying out stuff, and you're going to use something very similar for your first project. So the combination square typically comes as a 3-piece set. All right. And so what we have is the combination square itself. All right, which is the little square itself, and then the ruler. Typically, it will also have a protractor head. All right. And then a centering fixture. Now, a good quality one of these costs about 300 bucks. Yeah. So we don't have that kind of money. So we have Harbor Freight Special. These are, I think, $8. All right. They are good enough for what we're going to do. If I were doing something uber precision, this is absolutely not the tool I would use. All right. But it's really good for laying out materials and getting an idea of what it's going to look like. All right. Why do I lay out materials? For my 2 people from the summer. Why do we lay out materials?
So that you can minimize waste and you actually know what you actually can get the parts out that you want.
Okay. Noah?
What she said.
Oh my goodness gracious. Oh my goodness gracious. Let me go back and revisit that summer career.
Center part like somehow. Well, I think it just is experience. It just pulled out how that fast. Like you have some
Alright, so one of the projects is going to be this fancy little widget. Alright? Because while it looks really simple, right? All it is a couple holes and one of them's tapped, and yeah, I can do that. Alright? Well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it by hand. And I think we actually did this in 104. Alright, but we're going to do it again because not everybody was in 104 when I taught it. But why do I lay things out? Because so for that, all right, I'm going to go ahead and lay it out and say, I got a hole here, a larger hole here, all right, and I'm going to lay out center lines on my piece of work, and then when I start to actually machine it, when I actually start doing work on it, all right, I'm going to also measure, all right, and it gives me 2 shots at the apple, all right, because it's really easy, especially on a fairly complex part, all right, that you lose track of where you're at, and you think you're working on one part of the part when in fact you're not. You're working on something else, all right. And so if you lay a part out, all right, when you go to machine it, it gives you a second shot to say, oh wait, if it's not lining up with where you thought it should be, then you either messed up at the beginning when you laid it out, or you're making an error now, all right? And so by laying a part out physically, number one, it helps you map out that geometry in your head, all right? And then when it comes time to actually machine the piece, right, it gives you a second bite at the apple to make sure that you don't mess it up. So, a piece like this, not very expensive, there's probably a couple bucks there, maybe not even that. So over the summer I had a part that I was doing some contract work, and I cut 4 of them to make one, to get one right. All right. It was very, very fragile, and it was very, very precise on what it had to be. And even though I've been doing this for 30 some odd years, I still messed it up 4 times. Actually, I messed it up 2 times, and then the 3rd time when I was trying to do a soldering job on a part of it, I melted it, and I like to cry. Okay, so by laying out stuff, you give yourself a second option to make sure that it's still right. All right, so that was combination square. So what all are we going to do with a combination square? What do those 3 things do for us? And these are typically the same. You will see 64ths on those, fairly common, and even 128ths from time to time. What do we do with that? What is that square good for?
It would be good to keep something square.
I like where you're going with this. I like where you're going with this.
Measuring like anything with angles, whether it's square, protracted.
Right. So when we're doing our laying out, I had this piece up here, so I would lay this out, all right? And a lot of times, when we're doing things, geometry will be the same for multiple things. So everything might be in one plane. So this allows me to set up on the corner of that and to lay out a line that is perpendicular with this side and hopefully parallel with this side, depending upon if my piece itself is actually even square. All right. Protractor head. And these are really cheap. But again, if I'm going to lay something out with a 30-degree angle, right, I can dial that in, and then I can actually mark off my 30-degree angle. And even though these aren't really accurate, all right, say I'm going to machine at 30-degree angle, I would still go ahead and lay it out with this. And when I'm doing my setup, if it doesn't look like it's right, then I'm going to double check. All right, even though this might be off a degree or 2, when I go to set up my machine, I'm going to look at it and be like, wait a second, that's really not jiving. All right. So again, second bite at the apple to make sure that we're getting it right. Centering fixture. So if I were to lay this over the end of a piece of pipe, all right, this allows me to scribe down the center line of that piece of pipe. All right. So the little centering fixture is actually quite handy. If you have questions, be sure and ask them. All right. So next we're going to go to what's called a vernier caliper. Please do not drop that. That's like a $400 caliper. Pass that one right there. We'll give you a few minutes to look at each of those as they come around, and then let's talk about the differences. So let's talk about what we've seen. Are there differences between the 4 vernier calipers that we passed around? So what differences have we seen? Precision? How so?
I mean, I've only seen 2, but the plastic one and the one that's passed immediately after it.
Okay. So we have 4 of them. So we've got a plastic one. We have actually 3 steel. So we have a long steel. We have 2 short steels. One is shorter than the other. And then a short steel. So let's talk about the plastic one first. And actually I have multiples of those. Okay, so on the plastic one, what do we have? Are there different scales? What are they? What? Right, so we have imperial and metric measurements. All right. How accurate do you think this thing is? Yeah, I wouldn't trust it. All right. I bought them as a teaching aid simply because it is a vernier caliper and they're inexpensive. All right. And you really don't see many vernier calipers out there today. You will see them on height gauges, all right, which I don't have one out here because it's beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. But occasionally you need one. All right. And so over the summer, we had a need for that. Why did we have a need for that one?
This one?
Uh-huh.
Because
Oh, yeah, I was
we were measuring something that was too big for a regular caliper, and it was in millimeters. And I have the decimal, so I have the decimal equivalent for inches, but we didn't have a caliper that went that big, and it needed to be a precision part. And this measures to 1,000.
Right. And so, you know, and to be honest, you know, prior to that, I hadn't used a vernier caliper in probably 20 years, maybe longer than that. Right. You don't use them very often, but they are the standard for height gauges. And in this particular instance, you know, this is a 24-inch caliper, and so, you know, when I'm trying to get accurate measurements for something that's bigger than give me that other large. So this is a 12-inch dial caliper, right? But if I've got something that's over 12 inches, I'm just out of luck. I can't accurately measure it unless I've got something bigger. All right. Now they make dial calipers this big and even bigger. All right, but they're expensive. They're really expensive. This I got rather cheaply, simply because nobody uses vernier calipers anymore. So this, how accurate can I be?
Depending on the caliper.
That caliper right there. What level of accuracy can I be? Throw out a number.
Do you follow the 6 days rule where you can go 1 past the measurement tool?
How many zeros do I add? Okay, I can measure to a thousandth of an inch very accurately, and in actuality, I can probably get to half of a thousandth, all right, without a whole lot of effort, all right, because it was designed to be an accurate measurement tool. Can I do that with this? No, not even close. All right.
You can try.
Yeah, you can try.
The zeros don't even line up when it's closed.
Yeah. So, you know, right off the bat, you've got a mismatch in the scale. All right. Again, I didn't buy these so that we could actually use them. I bought them as a teaching tool. All right, because the vernier scale is kind of different. All right. So, how do we read this? How do we read this vernier scale? So everybody looked on here. What do we have here? Say what?
Inches?
We have inches, and then those inches are broken down into what? 25. Okay, so each little tick in there is 25 thousandths, 0.025. And then on this scale out here, we have 25 graduations. All right? And so when I'm measuring something with this, all right, I'm going to get my measurement, all right, and I'm going to look, and in this particular case, the 3 is visible, so it's 3 inches plus, and I'm going to count, all right, so there's 100 thousandths, so it's 3.1, all right, and then I'm going to look in here and I'm going to line up whichever one of these marks is closest to lining up with another. That would be the actual measurement. And I'd have to actually put on my glasses to see this because I can't see it clearly. All right, so it's a little bit different. It takes a little bit more time, and of course you have to have good eyesight. So what we'll have is and then over here on the side, we have this scale that is all the way out to 25. All right. So when I'm looking at it, all right, so we'll say that we come down here. So I can see the 2, so it's 2 inches. All right, or excuse me, 1 inch is 200 thousandths. So 25, 50, 75, 100 thousandths, 125, 150, 175, 200 thousandths, 225 thousandths. But I can't see the next tick. All right, so then I'm going to go look over here on this vernier scale, and this actually will be sitting on here, and whichever one of these little tick marks is lined up with another tick mark, that is the measurement. Okay? How many people are confused right now? Okay, where am I losing you?
Just on how the second part actually works.
So let's look at it. All right, so here's our secondary scale over here. So we can see the 3. We can see the 1. I can see 1 tick mark, 2 tick marks, so it's 50. I can get the 3, 1, 50,000, and then what I really want to look on this scale and see which one of these is actually lined up the best with one of these other tick marks. And yes, you need glasses, or at least good vision. I can't see it clearly.